So welcome to the future of work in a space for the senses. My name is Max Chapovsky. I help companies around the country find and negotiate the leases for their office space, ensuring that the space they have is the space they need and reflects and supports their company culture. The Future of Work is a series exploring our evolving relationship with work, the how, where, and why, the trends and technologies disrupting and improving the workplace, and perspectives from executives leading their organizations into our new normal. Every time we talk about the office, the conversation inevitably goes to the shifting role of the office. It's no longer just the place to do heads down work, since that usually doesn't justify the commute. For most people, though, it's evolving into a place to collaborate, build relationships, and do the things that can't really be done well on a video call. But the office has to change to rise to that challenge, and that change involves many disciplines, from interior design to lighting. These two in particular are critical to creating the kind of space that people want to come to. So joining us today are two people who spend their days thinking about this very subject. Julie Michiels is a senior associate principal and Chicago interior design leader for Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. She has worked on various award-winning projects, from 330 North Green and 800 Fulton Market in Chicago to high-rises in Shanghai and Australia to the renovation of Vanderbilt University's Kirkland Hall. And Cecilia Ramos is the senior director of the architectural market for Lutron Electronics. Having spent time designing the lighting of luxury retail brands like Louis Vuitton, Christian Dior, and Hublot prior to her time at Lutron, she now leads Lutron's expertise in the architecture and design community. She's also the co-author of the book Architectural Lighting, Designing with Light and Space. Ladies, welcome.
Thank you, Max.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Let's talk about how your individual companies actually sort of started adapting your approach to work. How did that look as a result of the pandemic? Julie, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. It was interesting because there were some things that we were thinking about just prior to the pandemic for ourselves and sort of rethinking how it is that we work. So we were kind of in process when that happened. And in a lot of ways, it just helped us to accelerate things that we were already thinking about. So to give a little bit of context, we actually were renovating our office. We had just completed design and just completed construction actually on our office the week that the city shut down for the pandemic. So on Friday, we all packed up our little orange moving crates with the intent that we were moving out of our swing space that we were in. And on Monday, we were going to come back to work and we were going to move into this great new office that had rethought a lot of the things about how we work. And instead, we all worked from home for 2 years. We never really set foot into the office. So it was an interesting time for us in particular in rethinking how we work. And we had thought a lot about flexibility in the redesign of our office space. And we had thought a lot about collaboration and how teamwork is really the key to success and innovation in the type of work that we do. And we're a multidisciplinary firm, so that collaboration has to happen across architecture, interior design. As you sort of said in the intro, there's a lot of people coming together to solve the problems of workplace and other project typologies as well. So it was really important for us to kind of think about putting that work on display and allowing for people to have those sort of chance interactions. And so I think, luckily, in a way, we had the foresight to be thinking that way. But over the pandemic, our technology had to improve to enable that flexibility, right? We had no choice but to make that flexibility possible. And our technology sort of supported that. And so in a lot of ways, when we came back to the office, and we are back 3 days a week, so I can talk about that more later, but it helped us to use the space with the choice that we intended, right? Like you said, there's sometimes heads down work, sometimes there's group work, sometimes there's small teams that need to get together. And so that improvement really helped. And I would say one other thing that was like a big takeaway was the flexibility, not just in physical space or technology, but in personal needs. And like, I think there's a lot more empathy and understanding for family and personal needs and flexibility that came out of that in ways that, I mean, you saw it in the background of people's lives, right? You got this like little Zoom window into people's kids running by and pets and family members, and you kind of like can't then go back and walk away from all that, right? So I think there's a lot more empathy and understanding for that people have personal needs.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. Cecilia, what about you?
It's interesting because I think the personalization of space, Julie, was one of the critical things that emerged out of those months and years working from home. And if you kind of extrapolate that to what it means to the business that we're in, which is the business of lighting, Lutron invented the dimmer switch, more than 60 years ago. And we're really in the business of experience. We're in the business of moods and atmospheres and how you can transform space through light. And I think one of the more interesting things that it challenged us with was, I think we had the understanding of how light and atmosphere influences physical spaces pretty down pat. I mean, of course, we're constantly learning and evolving, but all of a sudden it became, how can you create that moment of shared experience across digital and physical platforms? And we had to, rethink the way that we did business, whether it was finding a way to reappropriate our experience centers so that we could have clients understand the impact of light on space through a screen in their own home, drawing analogies to home life as well. And then we also had to, think through, how do we design moving forward in a time of uncertainty where what we know now isn't necessarily what it's going to be in 2 months from now. And I think one of the biggest examples of that is the first 3 months of the pandemic. We were fielding a ton of questions about touchless technology because there is that fear of what happens when you touch a light switch. Are you going to get COVID?
Right.
And our presentations and our education is really focused on that. Fast forward 2 years, that's kind of fallen by the wayside. And now it's all about that human experience and bringing communities together, as Julie mentioned. So I think we're constantly evolving and constantly learning, but truly, the idea of flexibility, designing for what we don't know, and then creating experience both physically and digitally became some of the foremost, themes that we focus in on.
So let's stay on that subject for a little bit. So as we talk about the evolution of technology, how has lighting technology evolved to sort of meet workspace needs? If you think about, starting with that movie, if you remember like Office Space, how they all sat under that terrible fluorescent lighting, right?
Right.
It's almost comical now thinking about it.
Yep.
But how has technology sort of evolved to meet workspace needs?
Yeah, I think if you think about the office of the past, it was static light that was overly bright that almost, chained people to their desks in a way. And now what we're seeing is a demand for lighting as an amenity, not just as a necessity, but truly something that can do more for the space and the people. And that might mean, having people connected to the space outdoors through light and introducing the concept of dynamic light that transforms throughout the course of the day, mimicking that of the natural sun, such that if you, work in the office at noon and then stay until 8 p.m., the lighting kind of carries you through that experience and warms and dims as the night goes on, which also speaks to the changing needs of, the workplace now, where it's not a fixed time that people are present. There's a lot more flexibility, both in the days that people go in and out, as well as the time that people are there. So I would say, lighting as an amenity where it's not just providing lux levels, but creating moments of experience, light, connecting us to nature and those rhythms of daily life. And then also the concept of being able to personalize it. So when you walk into a conference room, perhaps you press a button that goes right to the settings that you like, or scan a QR code, which triggers the warmth and intensity that feels right to you to present digitally, whether it's in the same country or maybe in a different country of the world. And then there's opportunities to use lighting to kind of tie together different cultures and different experiences. So that's a few ideas, but I'll pass it off to Julie and hear from you what you've heard and thought about.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of the same, actually. And I think a couple of interesting things to build on those ideas. Like, I actually recently had the great opportunity to spend time with Cecilia and her team in New York at their Lighting Experience Center. And actually, like, that user interface and that ability to personalize and customize is really easy with their products. And like, it was really cool, like that there's even an app on the iPhone where I could like tweak or adjust or make last minute changes to some preset settings, or I could flip between preset settings. And I think I think the very first thing that you just said, gone are the days of this like big static office environment, whether that be lighting, thermal comfort, furnishings, anything. There's choice and there's control and there's permission to have that control, right? I think there's been also a past where we've implemented these sort of amenities, but everybody's afraid that they're going to get in trouble for actually using them. And so I think that permission is an important part of our culture now too, to be able to and encourage to personalize space in those ways. And also another project that we're working on now and that we're just wrapping up, John Deere has taken space in 800 West Fulton Market, which is one of the buildings you mentioned in my bio, and it's a building that SOM designed and completed that opened during the pandemic, and thankfully did have the foresight to make a lot of strong connections to the outdoors. There's a series of terraces that go up the building, and John Deere's office is on one of these floors. So they have this very strong both visual and physical connection to the outdoors. And so it was important for us from a lighting perspective on that project to also be able to connect to that changing daylight throughout the day, like Cecilia was talking about. So in that project, we are including dynamic tunable white lighting in the open office spaces so that that color temperature tracks more closely with the change in lighting throughout the day, so that people are more connected to the outdoors and it's more in sync with sort of natural circadian rhythms. I know that's a little bit of a tricky topic, and I know that's kind of different for everybody, but there are certain sort of overall benefits to having that connection.
Well, that's a lot to think about. If you sort of think back, Julie, on the evolution of the workplace, the design of the workplace, and how it's evolved from, office heavy to lots of cubes with tall walls to the open space to now, talk about that a little bit and where you think it's going in light of the pandemic and some of the trends that's accelerated.
Sure. I think, you said it in the beginning, and I think we all kind of know this now, like people need a reason to be in the office. Like, why am I coming here if I think I can do my job at home? And I think that connection to people is a strong one. I think sometimes even people looking for work-life balance, like, need a little bit of that separation, right? The workstation set up at the end of your dining room table is not the answer to work-life balance.
Yeah.
And so that idea of flexibility and user control and user input is, I think, a big shift. Thinking back on office spaces, maybe earlier in my career, I've been focused on workplace for, let's see if I do the math quickly, a little over 15 years of my career now. And there was a strong push at some point for this very regimented, corporate, branded kind of experience. And it didn't always take into account individuality. It didn't take into account culture of an individual city that folks might be in. And it certainly wasn't personalized in any way. And I think that there's been a shift away from that. And I think more closely tied to, if we're trying to bring people together, right? Thinking about spaces that have historically done that naturally. So civic plazas or cafes, even now, I think it's a little bit, this is maybe more recent in terms of development, but hotel lobbies and bars and restaurants, right? Places that sort of people naturally gravitate to be with other people. And how do we, find those characteristics and bring those to our work and bring amenities to people that they don't have at home and that makes them want to get out and take advantage of that? I think we can't pretend that all the talk about water cooler interactions, those chance interactions leading to innovation, just evaporated and we can all work from home. That is still, I think, very real, and us being together and coming together is still very critical to success of companies. And so creating craveable office space that people want to come to is important for the success of businesses in the future. Oh, Max, I think you're muted.
Gotta love that.
Sorry,
no, it's, I did that because there's some background noise. I just want to make sure that, if you're not talking, then if you want to mute yourself, would be helpful. I was saying craveable office space. I love that. I'm going to write that down. It's interesting because when you talk about spaces where people come together, one type of space that comes to mind is the lobby of a hotel. And the way that when you enter a well-designed, thoughtfully designed hotel lobby, your mood almost changes, right? And so what I've seen is there are some influences around, from the hospitality world and from other, even from the residential world that are now impacting, space design and lighting with, Cecilia, even in your world, warmer temperatures, right? Of the lights, right? More incandescent versus fluorescent. So I'd love for you to maybe talk a little bit about how some of those hospitality and maybe residential design trends are influencing the work that you're doing.
Yes, I think with hospitality, it's a huge influencer right now in the corporate office space. And I can think of a project that we worked on in the Pacific Northwest where they had originally installed moody lighting in a beautiful lobby, and it was amazing by night. It was a sexy cocktail lounge type environment where people gathered. But then during the daytime, it was dark and uninviting, and it wasn't being used as that coffee shop, collaborative laptop environment that they envisioned. And so we, Lutron, got called in with our line of lighting called Kedra that does dynamic light, and we retrofitted the light fixtures and the decorative lighting in that lobby. And it was almost instantaneous, the change that it produced for the hotel, where all of a sudden that became that active communal space where people came together and wanted to be at. And I think we can all, draw a parallel to our favorite restaurants. Like if you walk by an amazing restaurant by night, but it's brightly lit and it's kind of cool in color temperature, no one's going to go there, no matter how good the food is. Yeah. So I think that change or maybe the embracing of a space having a multiplicity of purposes throughout the course of the day, and then the use of lighting to further enhance that, I think are hospitality trends that we're now seeing in corporate office. If we look at windows, that's another form of lighting, right? The entrance of natural daylight into a space, so that has to be calibrated with electric light. I think in a lot of hospitality spaces, there's like an embrace of softer finishes, ripple fold curtains, materiality that helps also deaden sound in the space and provide good acoustic conditions. We're seeing that also, translated into office spaces, because as people may or may not like or employ ACT tile in the ceiling, right? There's other ways to make spaces beautiful and acoustically sound, to use drapery and curtains as another materiality or methodology to add kind of texture to a space and acoustical control, and also access to natural daylight is another thing that we're seeing translated.
Julie, before you answer, I have a funny story. I used to have a video production company, and we were shooting in an office. And it was just kind of a small scripted video, but of course it took longer than we thought it was going to take, and it started getting dark outside. And we knew that if it got dark enough, then it would impact the continuity of the scene, right? And so we literally took all the lights we had and put them right by the windows to try to light this one person. And we had to get so close to them because you could see that those lights were barely impacting kind of the bigger area. And it was just such an interesting reminder of just how powerful it is to have natural daylight coming in through big windows, because once we had to replicate it, it was damn near impossible.
Right.
Like it's just crazy. Yeah. Right. So, what about you, Julie? How's hospitality design, sort of the hospitality design trends influencing what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, they definitely are. I think and it's been happening for, a while now, but I think it's trying to get that vibe of, like you said, it's transformative to walk into these like great hotel lobbies. Not every hotel lobby out there, but it's definitely been a movement. And I think it's that feeling of there's like sort of a buzz or a vibrancy, right? And that's not good for like an entire workplace, but a moment of workplace. And even sometimes like that arrival moment, that's where it's important to give your staff or your visitors and guests like this great sort of moment where you come into the space and it feels active and it feels vibrant, but it also at the same time balances out with feeling comfortable and welcoming, and like you want to just like, come in, sit down, grab a cup of coffee or grab a cocktail even. And we're seeing a lot more program requirements like from the get-go with our clients where that kind of a space needs to be incorporated somewhere. So it takes on different names, from the hub to, a pantry to a den or a lounge. There's different ways of incorporating that. But I feel like every project lately, our clients are on board and educated about that. It's not even us bringing that idea to them anymore. Like it's a must-have. So I think finding that balance, like you also mentioned residential, and I feel like that goes back to this idea of what is it really from a residential environment that we want to bring to the office, that we're not, again, I'm a big believer in in striking work-life balance. There needs to be some separation, but coming from home where you were able to fully control your environment, right? If I want to put a set of fluffy pillows all around me and crank the heat way up and turn the lights off, like I could do that. And so how do we give some of that control in the office space, I think is the key thing. And maybe some snacks, right? Who didn't spend half of COVID rooting around in their kitchen looking for snacks in the 2 minutes they had between Zoom meetings? So
it's funny, for sure, snacks and the control piece is so interesting because, if you think back, I don't know, 10, 15 years, the AC controls in the offices, how they had that plastic box over them with a key that you couldn't control it. That to me was the epitome of a lack of control and ability to personalize a space for somebody. Yeah. And, I'm with you. You don't, it obviously doesn't have to be all couches in your office, but certainly the creature comforts of home help bring people in because they kind of reduce the friction that people might have between them and their work. And, one name I've heard for the role of the office, if it's a place for people to come together, is like Main Street. Main Street or the town square, because that's where people come together. It's where they have all hands. It's a really interesting way of looking at it. When we talk about building amenities, there are obviously some of these items that tenants look for more than others. So what are some building amenities that you're seeing that are resonating most with your clients?
I'll jump in first on that one. I think that the access to outdoor space feels like a must. I feel like before COVID, it was a growing need, but it was maybe in smaller demand, or like it was okay if you had like one, terrace somewhere. And I think that in Chicago in particular, people question the validity of it. Like, you can only be outside like 3 weeks a year with the weather.
Yeah.
And people couldn't really envision how you work outside. So it was viewed as like people are sitting outside lounging around, like having a coffee break all day or whatever the perception might have been. And I think now, people figured out ways to work outside on their patios or their decks or their balconies or even at a coffee shop not everybody has a balcony during COVID, or and also people were really concerned about fresh air and access to fresh air. And I think our sustainable engineering studio really drove home that point for us. We did a lot of studies and work on airflow and exchange of fresh air in a workplace, and how important that is to creating a healthy workplace. So COVID or other, health included, that was really important. So I think in terms of amenities, like access to outdoor space is a huge demand right now. And in multiple climates, not just, because like warm climates have their concerns too. Like we're working on a project in Miami and they don't want humidity and mosquitoes coming in.
Yeah.
So they have other, sometimes I think in Chicago we forget that there's other outdoor air concerns. Just because it's warm somewhere doesn't always mean they want to connect to the outdoors that strongly either.
100% like Phoenix in July. You definitely aren't looking for a big connection to the outdoors 100% of the time.
Right. So maybe some shade. And that's like, I think a thing that we need to work on is like through controls, through our infrastructure, like what do those connections look like through thermal comfort, through lighting, through shading, through, like how do we make those connections stronger and more meaningful and not negate the fact that we work in enclosures for a reason.
100%.
Right.
Yeah.
And I would also add, I think, on the more technical side or technology side of things, I think clients are looking also to future-proof their spaces a little bit because they don't know what's going to happen next and they don't know how the needs might change. And so we're seeing a lot of demand for what we call digitally addressable fixtures and technology, which means that, day one, you might have a grouping of lights zoned for a big room, but if day two you decide that needs to actually be 3 small huddle rooms, you put up the partition walls, you can digitally address those fixtures and change the zoning on the fly. So you don't have to tear down ceilings, you don't have to rewire anything, you don't have to invest in that. So I think that flexibility through infrastructure is a big one. And then I think another concept relevant to future proofing is, how can we learn from our buildings and how people use them? And whether that's through sensor technology that lets you know what spaces are being occupied at what time of day, or even how people are using their shades to either cut out glare or give access to views throughout the course of the day, and then how that in turn affects the dimming settings of a light space or light system. It's like all these different components working together, and if you can employ a system that observes, collects information, and then allows a facility manager to extrapolate, and then architects to make recommendations and space planners to make recommendations based on that data moving forward, that is a future-proof or forward-thinking way of building your system and building lighting into a system.
And it also helps with justifying the investment, right?
Exactly.
If you can demonstrate an ROI,
exactly,
because of some of the efficiencies. Let's talk a little bit about health and wellness. We talked about the connection to the outdoors, which I think people just naturally crave. What other important, features or products come together to make a space feel right to somebody from a health and wellness perspective?
We've had some clients interested, like we were working on a project in Australia actually where they were very interested in the idea of chromotherapy and light. I'm going to get the terminology wrong, but how do we use light to impact people's health and wellness, and light in particular and color added into that. And in the projects in Melbourne and in Australia in particular, they have this more robust way of thinking about how you arrive to work and how you depart from work. And so they have these what are called end of trip facilities. And it's, in some ways, it's like a glorified bike room, right? But it involves like major locker room and shower facilities. And they acknowledge that like people go out after work, they come there to sort of, it's this threshold to start and end your day in the office environment. And so lighting and color and materiality and acoustics and all of that sort of obviously are the tools we use to create that threshold. And so they were very interested in the idea of color and how that might change throughout the day. So when you come in the morning, and these are oftentimes subterranean spaces, you come in and you go down to these spaces, so they're not getting a lot of access to natural light. So it's good in a way, you have full control over that environment from a lighting perspective, but you also, as a user, maybe lose that sense of time of day and place when you're there. And so what are you giving back through the lighting? And when you come in the morning, you're wanting people to feel energized about the workday. And at the end of the day, maybe you're helping them transition into a dinner event that they're going to, or, leaving to go pick up their kids from school or whatever, or they're going to the gym, whatever the case might be. So there's been some interesting work that we've been doing around that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because we're seeing a lot of crossover in even like the healthcare environments of needing to design spaces for break and pause and relaxation and reflection. And I was just with a general manager of our major senior living community center here in New York yesterday. And as she was constructing her project, she'd had her offices on the memory care level where they had our Ketra dynamic light employed. And so she'd been living under Ketra lights for numerous months of construction. And now she's just been, put into her official office on the ground floor in a space that's without windows and with no dynamic light. And she's like, at 3 p.m. every day, I just want to go home. Right. And so it's these anecdotal moments where you realize what the impact of light is on people's kind of mental well-being and how it can affect the day-to-day that are really interesting to pursue. And then like Julie was mentioning, designing those moments of pause, respite. You use the word threshold, which I think is a really nice word as well, because it's talking about bridging two different activities or two different spaces. And so that's kind of one trajectory of lighting and well-being. I think within the greater conversation of materialities, and I'm sure Julie can go super deep into this, but within like our shading lines, we're seeing a lot more requests for PVC-free fabrics. Just a general nod to the effective physical materials on ourselves and our space. And if you look at the WELL building standards, there's a lot of different benchmarks to hit there for materiality or glare control or natural light. So it's absolutely a theme that we're discussing on almost every, if not all, projects these days.
Yeah. I want to go back. I just want to touch on kind of bring together two things that you guys have both mentioned. You just mentioned aging, and also I think you had mentioned previously digitally adjustable lighting. And I think one thing like that we're trying to keep in mind too is that the workforce is working longer in many ways, right? Like further into their careers, into higher age brackets than we've seen before. And it's a natural progression of your visual acuity. Like your eye doesn't receive as much light as you age. And so we're talking about all these great loungy environments, but at the same time, that doesn't like functionally work for everybody all the time either. And so one thing that we've been looking at too is how do we take our lighting that might have more uniformity during the day, and as the day progresses on, start to turn over that individual control. Like I'm looking out the window of the conference room I'm in because our open office has track lighting, and each of those it has general uplighting for uniform lighting throughout the office space, but then each desk has a track head over it, and each one of those track heads is individually digitally adjustable. And if you think about it kind of like your reading light on the airplane, after the airplane's turned down all the lights for the duration of the flight, you have that moment of control over your environment. And like, so we're in some ways trying to think about it like that. Like, how do I not have to necessarily impact everyone around me, but I can still get what I need out of this system when it starts to get outside of the regular work hours. And part of that is just the range of generations that are in the workplace right now is broader than it's ever been.
That's a great analogy to the airplane lighting, Julie. I hadn't thought about that one. And also reflecting on your first question, Max, which was how did our companies respond during the pandemic? I think both Julie in Chicago, as well as their other offices in New York and Washington, D.C. for SOM, as well as our offices, we've been building space during the pandemic and renovating and testing our concepts on ourselves during the pandemic, which is kind of an interesting thing because while Maybe some other companies went on pause. I think both, I don't want to speak for you, Julie, but it seems like SOM and Lutron, we were doubling down on our spaces for our people and testing a lot of these concepts on ourselves, which is fascinating.
Yeah,
Totally.
we definitely thought of ourselves as a lab where we could learn from the things that we're doing. And there's things that we wouldn't do for our clients here, but we can test those on ourselves so we can find out what the, derivative is or the next iteration is of that experiment that we would roll out to our clients. So yeah,
100%.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Cecilia, would you mute yourself if you're not talking? Be helpful. The question that comes to mind for me is, I know we talked about this a little bit before, but I love the idea of circadian rhythm lighting and how the temperature of the lights, the intensity of the lights changes with the time of day. We were actually looking at these lights for our house. I loved how you can program them to be, a little bit higher temperature, a little bit cooler during the day. And then as the day goes on, or as you dim the lights, they get a little warmer. But I'm curious to know, how that would be applied in the office setting. And if you could just talk a little bit about the idea of circadian rhythm lighting, that would be great.
Yes, I think that generally it's to create a light that is dynamic and feels natural and melds with that of the outside. So getting a little bit technical here, if you think color temperatures of light, typical offices usually fall between 3,000 Kelvin and a 3,500 Kelvin range. But natural light at the height of noon might be approaching 5,000 Kelvin. And so you have this discrepancy between this cool white light from the outside and this warmer light from the inside. And that blurring of exterior interior boundaries is not present when you have that discrepancy between the two. So I think to meld those two together, have light that is dynamic and changing, and that really also, as the sun sets, the sun sets in a very golden, warm tone from 2,700 Kelvin all the way to 2,200 Kelvin. You may not go that warm in an office, but to take it to a more comfortable level, because up until, let's say, 10 or 15 years ago, we all lived under incandescent halogen lights. And those lights, when you dim them, they warm in color temperature. And so this whole feeling of dimming and staying static is new through LED or fluorescent lighting and isn't quote unquote natural. It's not how, incandescent source or the sun behaves. And so it's amazing how we just kind of respond to dynamic light, and in an office, again, to create these spaces that can be used throughout the course of the day in different ways and still be warm and comforting at 8 p.m. should an employee choose to stay there that late, is important.
I had no idea that incandescents warm as you dim them.
Exactly.
I guess because we never had dimmable incandescents in any office that I used to work at, so we never really got far enough to find out. But I want to talk a little bit about the future, which is hard to predict, but certainly we can all dream, right? So if you were to put on your futurist hat and imagine an office, however many years from now in the future, that is built and designed and lit for the optimal human experience, what would that office have in terms of some of the features, the layout, the lighting? What would that look like in your mind?
I'll jump in. I think, it's a really tricky one. Like, I think we think about the future of office a lot. And like you said, no one has the crystal ball to see what's coming. And technology obviously impacts the ways that we work so quickly now. And we've been talking about it for several years at this point, but, just the postures that we have with phones, iPads, like the multi-device user, right? Like, I even have to think about like that I have a key card, a cup of coffee, an iPad, a laptop, I need surfaces to put those things on. We recently had a discussion about the future of a conference table. Like, what even is that anymore? Yeah. And it's like a holder for all of our devices.
It's true.
More than anything at all. But I think, we keep going back to these concepts, I think, around flexibility and wellness. And those sort of are a little bit inextricable in some ways. But again, there's so many variables to consider in the workplace. And I think there will only continue to be more. Like, it's not going to become more homogenous. If anything, it'll become more diverse in skill sets and tasks needed to be done, in age, in device use, like all that kind of stuff, that the only way to future-proof, to Cecilia's point, is to provide that sort of flexibility to either move or expand on a system that you have, or provide, like, Cecilia, I think you can obviously speak to this better, but like a product that you guys are working on has, like our iPhones, like there's like software updates instead of hardware change outs, right? And thinking like that kind of mentality, I feel like, is what's going to help us move into the future. But it's really hard for me to envision what that looks like, I have to say.
Yeah, I don't think any of us can wave the crystal ball. We can only try to prepare ourselves for spaces that can be fluid and dynamic and changeable. And to Julie's point, the infrastructure and the systems that we put in, how can those be appreciating assets rather than ones that you install day one and then 5 years down the line are obsolete or something of the past? And embracing the cloud technologies and the ability to push software updates as you innovate and think of new ideas and new ways of using your space and your equipment within. I think that's absolutely critical. And then I think it will continue to be a personalized space. I don't think we'll go back to that homogenous space that is kind of a middle for everybody.
Right.
Yeah,
I agree.
It's going to be a space that hopefully feels as warm and welcoming and comfortable and as personalized as our homes.
Yeah.
And to be able to provide that opportunity for people to make it their own, I think it becomes an important part of the design process and the forward thinking.
And I think I hate to be the one to lob this out here, because this is not the thing that I am an expert in or am dabbling in much myself at the moment. But like, there is a lot lately in sort of in the design industry and architecture and interior design around the metaverse, and also around the use of artificial intelligence. So there's a lot that's been, there's even like metaverse design awards already. Like, people are designing for these virtual spaces. And I think it's interesting, or will be interesting, to see kind of what comes from designing in a space that doesn't have the same sort of like gravity, right? Or like, maybe you don't have to worry about thermal comfort in the metaverse. I don't know yet. Like, I don't kind of know what happens there, but like, I'll be curious to see what discoveries might be made that might impact physical space or the ways that we work. So I'm curious to see where that will take us.
And the AI portion is absolutely relevant as well. I joked with my husband yesterday. I had a software update to my iPhone, and all of a sudden my entry screen with the time is like big and bold. And I said to Alex, I said, this is ugly. I want it back to like the skinny font type. And he goes, it probably realized that you're blind and you keep zooming in, right?
Right. It's like, oh, she needs bigger font now.
And I paused for a second. And I thought, well, you might be onto something, right? So, I mean, in terms of future thinking and how systems adapt, I mean, that stuff is all very possible.
Right. And back to that, like the data collection, like we are trying to create buildings that learn, right? Like we're doing that now. And we've been talking about this again, and it's like data collection's getting more robust, and we're being able to analyze it better. And so it's able to inform us of things that like we should change, or ways that we should think about things differently, as we move forward. So
there's so much to talk about there, but I do think that AI and the ability to, as much as possible, try to, it's almost tough to say this, but try to future-proof the hardware as much as you can so that the software can be updated. Like Tesla's, OTA updates to the cars, like their hardware hasn't changed a ton in the last 5 years. I mean, the design is pretty much exactly the same of the cars themselves, but the software is what makes, helps them to release the new features. But then you have to understand what hardware is going to be enough to do the job, or over engineer it, for the future. We have, let's just say time for one more question. So, when in today's age where capital preservation is very high at the top of priority list for most companies, and they have to, make the case for all the investments they make, especially as it relates to space. So what should they focus their capital on when it comes to space design and lighting? In other words, what are the sort of highest ROI investments a company can make to help improve the environment for their employees?
I think it's focused on the space that brings people together, and it's focused on people, right? So providing those amenities that make it comfortable, that make it craveable, going back to that idea. And I think that, not pandering to Cecilia, but I think lighting and control of the space is like hugely important. Like I think, and it's always in a way, in terms of capital preservation, I think that was a good way for me to phrase that. It's a target because it's a big number on a project, and we are always trying to preserve the intent of those elements on a project because they're very impactful to the success of a space. Lighting is hugely important you can put in all the comfortable furniture and materials you want, and if you put terrible lighting on it, it will not be successful. It won't read the way you intended. So anyway.
Totally.
I completely agree with Julie. It's about the human experience, because ultimately the human is one of the largest portions and expenses within a company, that human capital, and how to make people most productive, how to use your architecture and design as a tool to recruit and then to retain talent, which has big financial implications as well. And then, how can you use lighting? How can you use interior design? All of those things that we're involved in to promote spaces that are good for people, that bring the community together, and then in turn foster ideas, foster loyalty, foster collaboration. That's, I think, where people are putting their money these days, because they recognize the importance of it all.
Right. If the space is going to be a town square,
right,
then make it good.
Exactly.
I think some companies are afraid to move away from the individual desk space, and there's a lot of money that goes into that as well. And people are using that less and less, because that's the type of work that can be done in a focus room. It can be done in the cafe at a, the Starbucks table, if you will, and that capital could be reallocated to things that would make the space more impactful, like better lighting and better control. So
totally. I mean, if you have 40,000 square feet and 20,000 square feet is used for heads down space, and people are using that, 1 day a week, maybe 2 days a week overall, then that's half of your footprint that is completely underutilized. And so the biggest sort of push that I'm seeing with my clients is the need for flexibility, and you can rearrange a space. And now it's kind of more in the arena of assembly spaces, change it from classroom style to maybe in the round or something like that. Mm-hmm. But I think ultimately sort of the holy grail is for the entire space to be flexible, with the exception of maybe the areas that need plumbing, like the cafe or whatever, right? The bathrooms, but everything else to be completely reconfigurable. I think that would just reduce the real estate footprint so much. And then companies can focus that capital in a smaller space, allowing them to make that small space that much better.
We need wireless power and pipeless plumbing.
Yeah.
Right? We got wireless internet. We need all those other tentacles to find a way to untether us fully.
Well, wireless power is here. It is not
I know.
at the consumer level yet,
Right.
but wireless plumbing, that's going to be that is
Might have some bigger challenges
once
to
we get
overcome
that
there,
done.
but let's dream.
They're not in our favor.
totally.
Let's dream. Let's dream.
Well, we got a dream. Well, ladies, this has been fantastic, super enlightening and inspiring. I really appreciate you joining and sharing your wisdom. Julie Michiels with SOM, Cecilia Ramos with Lutron. Thank you. And thanks to everyone else for tuning in to the future of work and a space for the census. We'll talk to you next.